It is Monday, August 30th, 2021. Big Ten football is here. In fact, we're coming off a week 0 game where we already saw an upset. I'm Aaron McMahon, joined by Matt Wenzel. Both of us cover Michigan and Michigan State football programs for MLive.com. We're here to talk Big Ten football and specifically those two programs. Michigan and Michigan State are both set to kick off their 2021 seasons this weekend. Michigan State Friday night at Northwestern. Michigan at home Saturday against Western Michigan. Both games are going to be televised live nationally. I'm sure most of you already know the times, but we're here to talk football. It was a busy off season for both programs. Lots of changes in various areas and for different reasons. Matt, kick us off with Michigan State. Give the fans kind of an outlook or outline of what exactly transpired during the off season, with whether it's the staff or the roster itself.
Yeah, so this really began last fall. I mean, typically when you get there's off-season attrition in every program, but when you get a new coach, there's going to be usually more turnover than usual. But, the pandemic, no spring practice, that kind of pushed it all back. So started in November when Michigan State started having guys hit the transfer portal. 27 have transferred out since November, and they've brought in 19 transfers. So they have 33 new scholarship players on the roster, 18 from the recruiting class, 15 transfers. And that's really, Mel's just tried to speed up the rebuild by bringing in guys, some of these guys who have, Power 5 SEC playing experience. So it's really good. It's really kind of difficult to get a feel for this team right now. You have some ideas in certain areas, but until they get on the field at Northwestern, get a look at how these guys actually fit into a new scheme and what a full normal offseason will do for this program. That's really going to be it's kind of a guess going into Friday. So I know Michigan didn't have as much turnover, but there was certainly some. So what does it look like for them?
Yeah, they had a bunch of transfers themselves. 16 left the program, but obviously it was for maybe different reasons. Jim Harbaugh obviously still there, still the head coach, but he made some drastic changes with his coaching staff this offseason. Dismissed defensive coordinator Don Brown, brought in a new defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald. Hasn't really coached at the college level, but he has experience with the NFL and the Baltimore Ravens and being around defensive schemes. So what we're going to get from this defense remains to be seen. But along with him has come several other new assistants. They got a new passing game coordinator and defensive backs coach and Steve Klinkscale, a new linebackers coach and George Hilo. And then obviously there's changes on the offensive side. They brought in, it was well documented, the return of Mike Hart to coach running backs, new quarterbacks coach and Matt Weiss. So there's a lot going on. They moved Jay Harbaugh from running backs to tight ends. They promoted Sharon Moore from tight ends to offensive line coach and co-offensive coordinator to help out with Josh Gass. There's a lot going on. Jim Harbaugh clearly made it an impetus this year of this offseason of changing the way that they're doing things, not only from a schematic standpoint, but from an attitude and leadership standpoint. Some new faces, and really the common denominator among the new coaches is just the staff has gotten a lot younger. Before, Don Brown was in his mid-60s. One of the other coaches that left in the offseason, Mike Zorich, had been with Jim Harbaugh and Michigan programs since Jim got here in 2015. So there were a lot of older folks, guys that Jim kind of came in with, so to speak, and he had to cut ties with. So it was a unique offseason. We're going to see, I think, a drastically different defense, a little bit more diverse, and kind of just more diversified defense than what we've seen in the past. Don Brown got some criticism for throwing in a kind of a man press scheme that didn't change a ton. And sounds like McDonald's going to change things. So with them has come a few new transfers, not nearly as many as Michigan State has had. And few, it looks like, guys that perhaps will be impactful in the game. Nonetheless, the notable ones, Alan Bowman, the quarterback from Texas Tech, graduate transfer. Sounds like he's number 3 in the depth chart at this point, so we're not sure how much we're going to see of him early on. And they had a couple guys. Jordan Whitley, defensive tackle, graduate transfer from Oregon State. So again, we don't know how much he's going to play either. So we'll see. It seems like in the past when Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan staff have added graduate transfers, it was for a specific reason, typically to fill a hole. That's the case with these guys. We just don't know how much they're going to play. So remains to be seen with those guys. The new staff, we don't really know exactly what this defense is going to look like. We've heard things. We can kind of guess and take our stab at how it's going to look. But until we see week one, it's going to be interesting. And I want to get into offense on both sides of the ball. I mean, it's a area of the game everyone likes to talk about. Michigan State loses their quarterback last year, and they got to replace him. They got some other changes they have to make. Let us know what's going on the offensive side.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody remembers Rocky Lombardi from last year. He was, he won the job getting out of fall camp, beat out Peyton Thorne. Got him a couple upset wins, but obviously inconsistent other than that. Got hurt, lost the starting job, and he transferred out to Northern Illinois. So Mel Tucker brought in Anthony Russo. He's a grad transfer from Temple. This guy's got a ton of experience, 26 starts. He's third in Temple history in passing yards, passing touchdowns, completions, I believe, 16-10 record as a starter. So he brought in an experience, and I think that's what you needed to do in that room, because Peyton Thorne is the only one who's taken a snap for the Spartans. He had 3 backup appearances last year when Rocky was struggling. After Rocky got hurt, he got the start for the season finale at Penn State and looked good. I mean, he had a great second quarter, threw for 325 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick in the game. And really, it is 10:11 a.m. on August 30th, and we don't know who the starting quarterback's going to be. Mel hasn't said. I think he'll either say tomorrow during the press conference, or we won't officially know until we see the first team offense come out at Northwestern on Friday night. So it's Peyton Thorne or Anthony Russo is a toss-up. And I guess if it's that good of a competition, that's probably, I guess that's encouraging for the program, because their quarterback play has been inconsistent the last 3 seasons. So the hope for them is that they cut down on the turnovers. But it really starts with the offensive line. It has to get better if this offense is going to take a step forward. They just haven't been able to run the ball. Last year, the pass pro wasn't very good either. So they brought in Jarrett Horst. He's not a graduate transfer, just a transfer from Arkansas State. Looks like he's going to take over left tackle. A.J.R. Curry moves to right tackle, which allows Kevin Jarvis to move to right guard, where he started the first 2 years. So there's hope that offensive line with the full offseason will come together and improve a running game that was basically the worst in program history last year. They brought in Kenneth Walker, a transfer from Wake Forest, that they are really high on. He came in January, was with the team for spring practice. Everybody in the team, coaches and players, have been talking about the impact that he's going to make. So, I mean, it looks like he'll be your starter right there, at least you'd think. And then they have guys behind him like Elijah Collins, almost rushed for 1,000 yards 2 years ago, got COVID last summer and really struggled trying to bounce back. He had only 90 rushing yards last year on like 41 carries. Jordan Simmons was a true freshman last year, led them in rushing. He's there. Brought in Harold Joyner, a transfer from Auburn. They're crowded backfield, but it looks like Walker should get the bulk of the carries. And then really one of the strengths is receiver Jaden Reed and Jalen Naylor return as their top 2 guys. Naylor was a big play guy. He led the Big Ten in yards per reception last year. And then really they got young depth behind them. So finding that third guy and to go with the starters, probably Trey Mosley, maybe Montori Foster. Those are guys that you'll look to. I mean, for an offense that was terrible last year, the only highlight was big plays in the passing game. They had 8 completions of at least 45 yards. I'm sure the Michigan fans remember some of those plays. And then, that's basically the offense for them. I'd say, obviously look for the quarterback, look for Reed and Naylor to make plays, and look for Walker to maybe be the difference along with an offensive line in an improved running game.
I'm glad you brought up Rocky Lombardi, because I'm sure that's a game Michigan fans probably prefer to forget. But at the same time, they get to face him again this year. He's been named the starting quarterback at Northern Illinois. Michigan plays them week 3, so I'm curious to see how that ends up going. But anyway, Michigan's offense, I think there's some folks optimistic with this group. They got more experienced quarterback play coming back. We'll start with the quarterbacks, obviously. Cade McNamara is penciled in right now to be the starter. Everyone expects him to be week 1. The coaches have made no indications that they're going to go in any other direction at this point. McNamara is just really the guy they are high on at this point. He came in last year, I think, impressed some folks in games. He was able to move the offense, I think, which is most important, because last year when Joe Milton was in there, they just struggled. I mean, they couldn't move the football, they couldn't score, there was no cohesiveness, and there was something about McNamara when he came into the game that kind of ignited the Michigan offense. So at this point, they're going to roll with him. He had the best spring of the group. The other quarterback sitting there is J.J. McCarthy. I think the 5-star kid who I think everyone wants to see play, and I think you will at some point this year. But I don't think Michigan's ready to kind of roll him out there and put all the pressure on his shoulders just yet. Alan Bowman, I mentioned earlier, the grad transfer from Texas Tech, he was kind of the wild card coming in. The problem is, the wild card, I say that because he has 16 starts. He's probably he is the most experienced of the group. Problem is he didn't come in until the end of summer. He didn't have the spring with the team. He didn't have much time to kind of grasp the offense, and I think he's a little bit behind the 8 ball coming in fall camp. He's still got 2 years of eligibility left, so I'm curious to see what happens from here. But right now, this is certainly Cade McNamara's job to lose. Running back, Michigan returns its leading rusher from a year ago, Hassan Haskins. He averaged more than 6 yards per carry, more than 4 yards per carry after contact. So they really like what he brings to the table. The problem is they didn't run the ball a ton last year. They were near the bottom of the Big Ten in rushing yards per game. But they averaged, like I said earlier, like 4-something yards per carry. So they were productive when they did it. They just didn't do enough. And Josh Gaz acknowledged that. He realizes that they need to run the football more. And I suspect they will, especially with the offensive line they have coming back. It's an experienced group. They returned four guys with starting experience. They believe they're really 6 or 7 deep when it comes to potential stars. I think you're going to see some mixing, some matching. They're going to do some different combinations with guys. Zach Zinter, the right guard / center, they're very high on. I think they're going to try and play him as much as possible. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go about that. But also running back, I mean, they've got a guy they really like in Blake Corum. They used quite a bit in the outside last year. I suspect they'll do something similar this year. They got a 4-star recruit coming in, Donovan Edwards, true freshman. They said they will play week 1. What capacity or how remains to be seen. And the receivers, I think, are the group that is poised to make the biggest leap this year. They get their leading pass catcher from a year ago, Ronnie Bell, back. He's been very good. He's good in the slot, but behind him, they've got a group of guys. They're kind of willing and ready to break out. Cornelius Johnson being number 1. I mean, he's the guy we keep hearing about this offseason as making the biggest jump. He was second on the team in yards caught last year. He's that kind of big-bodied back on the outside I think Michigan really needs. He reminds me a little bit of a Donovan Peoples-Jones-esque in terms of his size and athleticism. So I think they're going to lean on him quite a bit. They had another graduate transfer I forgot to mention earlier, Dalen Baldwin from Jackson State. He had a big spring. Michigan liked what they saw. They brought him in for a workout this summer and offered him a scholarship on the spot. I think he figures to play a big role in their offense. They got a couple of guys there, younger guys, Roman Wilson, AJ Henning. I think they're going to lean on to some degree. But I think there's still a trust factor there. Tight ends, this group is nearly as deep as it was when Jim Harbaugh first got here, which I think is fascinating. And I don't think they're going to rely on them as much. But they do bring back Eric All. He dropped a bunch of passes last year. He's got to get that fixed. And then they got a couple of guys. Luke Schoonmaker's been in the program a couple of years. I think he knows what's going on. So we'll see how much he's utilized. But I think the more interesting name in that room is Joel Honingford, former offensive lineman. They've moved to tight end, and they like what they've seen out of him. His name has come up a couple times here in the offseason. I suspect you're going to see him, especially in pass blocking situations this fall. So Michigan's offense, I think, is poised to take a big leap. I mean, statistically, they weren't very good last year. They were 5th in the Big Ten in points per game, 7th in yards. But they averaged 6 yards per play, which finished 3rd in the Big Ten. So they were explosive when they had to be. Problem is their offense wasn't on the field a ton because their defense was giving up so many yards and so many points. So if their defense can improve, and I don't think it can get much worse than it was last year, I do think their offense stands to be a little bit better. Now we'll switch to the defensive side. Matt, let us know what you're seeing, maybe some potential players to watch and some strengths and weaknesses you think.
Well, that'd be one thing both programs could share from last year, the defense not coming anywhere close to expectations. Michigan State gave up a program record 35.1 points per game last year, so they'll definitely be looking to do better than that. For them, really, obviously starts up front, and that's where the strength is for this defense. They bring back 3 of 4 starters on the defensive line. Your starting ends, Jacob Panasiuk and Drew Beasley, are both back. They're using the extra year the NCAA gave due to COVID. They brought in Drew Jordan, the grad transfer DN from Duke. This is a guy who's played in 48 games. He's got 21 starts. This is somebody who you bring in with a lot of experience and expect him to contribute immediately, and he certainly should. They bring back 4 of their top 5 D tackles, where they lost Naquan Jones to the NFL, but you get Jacob Slade back, you get Jalen Hunt, who everybody's expecting to make this leap into, be really a breakout year for him. Deshaun Mallory, Maverick Hansen. So that's really the strength of the defense is right up front. They weren't statistically, the numbers against the run weren't very good last year, especially for a program that I think was 6 out of 8 years, and they ranked in the top 10 in the nation rush D, and they were first twice. But really, it was 2 games that made it ugly when Iowa and Ohio State just really gashed them on the ground, ran for like 500 and some yards, and they gave up like 20 or 22 rushing touchdowns, whatever it was last year. It was more than the previous 2 seasons combined, I believe. But I don't know. Those numbers are a little skewed. So I would expect them to be a little better against the run, but a lot of that's going to depend on the back 7, which is really the question mark for the whole team going into this year because there was so much turnover with the portal at linebacker and at cornerback. I think the reason basically Mel eschewed the typical spring game format just to have an open practice because they just didn't have the bodies at those spots. I think they had more quarterbacks dressed for the spring practice than they had linebackers. It just wasn't sustainable. So that's where the transfer portal and these guys that arrived in May come in. So at linebacker, Simmons is gone. Noah Harvey's back. And you think he should keep that job. And then it's really what the new guys are going to do. So you got, oh my gosh, Ben Van Sumeren. Sorry, lost my train of thought there for a second. Ben Van
Michigan
Sumeren.
Fans will remember him.
Yeah. Michigan guy, Ben Van Sumeren came in because, quite frankly, he thought with the new D coordinator, his role was going to change. He wasn't going to get the playing time that he wanted at Michigan. So Michigan State, he saw an opportunity to play immediately. And then, really it's Quavarius Crouch, you think, and Noah Harvey probably leading the mix. Crouch is a former top 70 or whatever it was overall recruit at running back who went to Tennessee, he changed. He wanted to play linebacker in college. So he spent the last 2 seasons at Tennessee, I think 23 games, 11 starts. So he's a guy they think should contribute immediately. So I'd say probably Crouch and Harvey at the top. After that, Van Sumeren, Chase Klein returns. He was the top backup last year. Cal Halliday is probably going to be, I would guess, the 5th guy in the rotation. Mel the other day said he thought there were 5 guys at linebacker that could play. And we saw Halliday teaming up with Crouch during the open practice last week, which was kind of interesting. But and then they got Xavier Henderson returns as their 3-year starter at safety. He's the leader back in the back of the D. And Angelo Gross is a guy who started the last 4 games at nickel last year as a true freshman. He's moved to free safety. Those 2 spots should be pretty well locked up in the starting lineup. And then at corner, again, it's kind of a mystery. Kalen Gervin returns as a starter, but will he even be able to keep that spot? They brought in, they hit the transfer portal hard at cornerback. Ronald Williams coming in from Alabama. I think anytime you can get a 6'2" corner from Alabama, that's probably a good sign. Chester Kimbrough played the last 2 seasons at Florida. He's definitely in the mix for a starting spot, and apparently he can play some nickel too. And really, it's after that, it's kind of a guessing game as far as they brought in Kari Crump and Marquis Lowry, or 2 more transfers, and they didn't play as true freshmen last year, so they kind of fit a little bit of different category, I'd say, than 2 guys who played in the SEC. Nickel Michael Dowell should be the starting guy there, and they've got some depth behind him. But really, yeah, defensively, it's that back 7 is just kind of hard to get a feel for, and it's going to take till Friday night till we really know. But yeah, so that's Michigan State side. What's Michigan look like on the DC?
Well, they got a lot of question marks and just a lot of unknowns. I mean, we keep talking about this offseason, what this defense is going to look like, if they're going to be better. And I think there's no way but up with this defense at this point. I mean, last year they ranked 13th in the Big Ten in points per game, 12th in yards allowed per game, 10th in rushing yards allowed, 13th in passing yards. They were near the bottom of every statistical category in the Big Ten defensively, and that was one of the reasons why you saw the dismissal of defensive coordinator Don Brown, most of that staff. But I do think they're going to try and do some things differently. Starting up front, the defensive line, they do get Aiden Hutchinson back. Their top defensive lineman, potential All-American candidate. He was at preseason second team AP All-American. He is by far their best defensive lineman. And they recognize that, they know that, and I think they're going to use him a little bit differently this year. It sounds like he's going to go from his typical, 2-point stance to a more traditional or less traditional hand off the ground, edge rusher, outside linebacker type. They're going to try and get him out and open in space, try and get him to the quarterback and make plays because, even the beginning of last year and even the year before that, teams are recognizing what he was doing, and they're double teaming and basically taking him out of the play. And the problem at that point is that Michigan just didn't have a ton of depth up there, much help to give him to get that pressure on the quarterback, which was so important for Michigan and Don Brown's defense. So anyway, they're going to use him differently. He is back. Michigan does get back their edge rusher and last year Taylor Upshaw. He figures to be used in a similar way. But I think the key for this defensive line this year specifically is they just have more depth in the middle. That was an issue, last year and in previous years. They were very young and inexperienced up front, and you saw that in big games against Wisconsin, Ohio State, where they were giving up big yards up the middle. They couldn't stop the run. I think they figure to be better this year with that. Donovan Jeter's back, Chris Hinton back. Both guys have started in the past. Jeter's a fifth-year senior. He's apparently made some strides. They like what they've seen out of him. But not only behind them, but they've got Mozzie Smith, who has finally developed, redshirt sophomore from Grand Rapids. They like his size. He's more of a typical nose tackle. So they've got more experience. They've got some depth. So I think they can do a little bit more up front. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're starting to see them go with a 3-4 front, because they can bring Hutchinson back and Upshaw back and play that outside linebacker spot. The linebacker position is, I think, the biggest concern for them, at least from a traditional inside linebacker's perspective. They get Josh Ross back. He's their most experienced guy. This will be his 5th year. He's been around the program a long time, and when he plays, he's very effective. His stats are hot. His stats are good. He's productive. And as long as he can stay healthy, I think they'll be okay there. It's the other inside linebacker spot that I think is the biggest question mark. I think most of us expected Mike Barrett, the Viper, and Don Brown's defense this year to kind of come back and fill that slot. It sounds like he's gotten beaten this offseason by Nikhil Green, the sophomore who played a handful of games last year. So we're going to see what's going to happen there. And then I don't know what Michigan's going to do from an outside perspective. I mentioned Hutchinson and Upshaw. I suspect they'll take most of the reps there. But how David Jabo and some other folks figure in remains to be seen. The secondary was, by and large, Michigan's biggest issue defensively last year. They got too many long, deep balls, too many one-on-ones where protection, they just communication broke down, they just flat out didn't play well. The good news, I guess, for them is they do get all their 4 starters back from last year, including their 2 safeties, Dax Hill and Brad Hawkins. They're by far their 2 better defensive backs and best playmakers. They've just got to figure out the cornerback position. Jamon Green is back. I thought he got better as the season went on last year. I think he could be a pretty good corner in the Big Ten. The problem is he just needs more time on task and more experience. Vincent Grey is a bigger question mark. He didn't play very well last year. It seemed like he was dealing with confidence issues. He apparently is being pushed by DJ Turner for the starter spot, but we haven't heard a ton about DJ Turner either. So I think Michigan's going to do some things to try and mask their deficiencies in the secondary, especially at corner. Look for them to go with more, 5-man secondary or 5-man defensive backs. They've talked about using Dax in the nickel packages. They've talked about perhaps using six defensive backs back there. They're going to do some things in long, passing downs to try and stunt, opposing teams attacking them, because they saw it last year. You saw it in the Michigan State game. And then a week later, Indiana did exactly the same thing, and Michigan lost because of it. So they have a new, as I mentioned earlier, new staff, new approach to things. And I think they're going to try and do some things to hide their deficiencies in the secondary. So that's it from Michigan's defensive side perspective. There's a lot of question marks. There's some good things. There's some good playmakers. But I want to transition now to the schedules. As I mentioned earlier, Michigan State opens Friday night. Northwestern. Michigan opens Saturday against Western Michigan at home. Matt, go over the Michigan State schedule with us. Maybe where you see some highlights, maybe some trouble spots, maybe a game they could steal. Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, if you're Mel Tucker and you have all these new players, all these moving parts, and you're really putting everything together for the first time live, you'd probably prefer not to do it on the road at night against the defending Big Ten West Division champions. So we'll see. Northwestern, they can kind of be an up and down program, but that's not the easiest debut. I mean, you'd probably rather flip the schedule and start against Youngstown State with a new team, but either way, so yeah, Northwestern, that'll be, a challenge to start. And then Youngstown State, which should be a win. And then we follow it with probably the second hardest game on the schedule. They got to go to Miami for a noon game. That should be both hot and quite a challenge for them. And then really, I mean, for them, I think the key for them is to get off to a good start this year. I mean, it's a cliche, obviously, but If you can steal a win at Northwestern, win against Youngstown State as expected. No, I don't think anybody's going to be picking them to beat Miami. But then you follow up with really three winnable games. Nebraska, which who knows what they're going to come in looking like in late September. And then Western Kentucky, those are home games. And you go on the road to Rutgers, which probably won't be the doormat that it was before with Greg Schiano back there. I mean, Michigan State saw a different Rutgers team last year to open the season. They came into East Lansing, snapped their Big Ten losing streak. Michigan State obviously didn't help themselves with 7 turnovers in that game, but that's that should be still a winnable game on the road. And then really the schedule gets a little more difficult. You got to go to Indiana, which they blanked Michigan State last year. You host Michigan, and who knows with that game every year. You go to Purdue, you host Maryland, and then you close with Ohio State and Penn State. So that's a tough finish. I think if you're Michigan State, really 6-6 in a bowl game, I think is a successful season for them. If everything were to break right, if all the new transfers and everything kind of just everything works together right, maybe you could get to 8 wins, something like that. But 6-6 in a bowl game would be a successful season. I think would show that Mel's got the program at least headed in the right direction. So obviously a different situation at Michigan. You got Harbaugh going in. He's not a second-year coach coming off a pandemic season, although that obviously played a factor, I'm sure, at Michigan as well. What's your thought on their schedule and kind of the outlook?
It's interesting. It starts with obviously Western Michigan Saturday at noon, but there's a very real chance or possibility here for Michigan to start 4-0. And I think we're going to learn early on what this Michigan team is about, because like I said, they could very well start 4-0. I think everyone expects them to beat Western Michigan. In what capacity or how close the game is, I think it's going to be key. But that week 2 matchup with Washington at home in Ann Arbor at night, under the lights on national primetime TV is, I think, going to tell us a lot about where this program is, and especially the defense. They're going to, I think the defense is going to take a few weeks to iron things out, to get acclimated to the scheme, to learn and just learn playing with each other. If they can steal that week 2 game against Washington, and like I said, there's a really chance they go 4-0 going into that game at Wisconsin on October 2nd. After that, I think it gets a little bit more difficult. I mean, I don't see them winning that Wisconsin game. They haven't won there in a long time. That Wisconsin team is picked to win the Big Ten West. I think they're just simply a better team than Michigan. Then you've got that tricky road game in Nebraska. Who knows what the Cornhuskers are going to look like at that point? We saw what they did Saturday, or I guess didn't do. And then you got toss-ups with Northwestern. You got a toss-up at Michigan State, a game they very well could lose. A toss-up with Indiana November 6th. Again, another game I have penciled in as a loss on November 13th. Again, at Penn State, another place Michigan really has had a difficult time winning. And then, that game against Maryland, they should win, but again, it's on the road. We don't know at that point what this Michigan team is going to look like. And then obviously Ohio State at the end of the year, another loss. So right there, I mentioned 3 definitive losses, and I think I counted 4 toss-up games on the schedule. I ended up going with 7-5 in my preseason predictions. I think that's right on the money. Most odds makers have Michigan's win total at 7.5. So they seem to think Michigan's either going to go 7-5 or 8-4. And I think it's more likely they go 6-6 than they go 8-4. So I'm rolling with 7-5. I think it's going to take too long for this Michigan defense to iron out its issues. And look, I've been saying this for a few weeks now, but if you go back to a couple of years ago when they brought in Josh Gaddis as new offensive coordinator, they had a returning quarterback, a ton of experience coming back, a bunch of NFL caliber guys in the offensive line. It took them like 6 games to figure the offense out, and they went 9-3. They underperformed. They were picked to win the Big Ten that year, and you saw how long it took. So, they have some talent back on defense, as I mentioned, but they got a lot of unknowns and a lot of things to figure out, and I don't anticipate them figuring out the defense relatively quickly. So I think that Washington game week 2 could very well be a loss. I really think go either way. But after that, I mean, they just don't have enough. They just don't have enough talent at this point, I think, to keep up with the Wisconsin or Ohio State or Penn State. And I think those three losses right there, and then I think they split the rest of the way, which I think is fine for this Michigan program. I think as for this season to be successful, I think they need to show progress as the season goes on. They maybe have to steal a win, whether it's the Indiana game and then win the Michigan State game and perhaps steal one at Penn State or something to get folks excited and showing that they made progress, especially defensively. I think that'll get fans, feeling more optimistic as things go on. But look, here's the reality. Pressure is on Jim Harbaugh. He acknowledges that. He knows that. He just signed an extension, so he's technically under contract now for the next 4 years. But that doesn't mean much if you go 4-8 or 5-7 if they underperform this year. Michigan fans are ready for a Big Ten title. They want one. They want to compete for it, and they haven't gotten there. I don't think they do it this year, but I do think they need to show baby steps here and show that the defense is growing as the year goes on. And then I think next year will potentially be that year. But until then, I mean, they got a lot of work to do, a lot of things to figure out. There's some winnable games on that schedule, but there's a lot of games they could lose too. So it's going to be a very interesting season. It starts Saturday, obviously, against Western Michigan. We will have full coverage of both games. Michigan State Friday night, MLive.com/Spartans. Michigan Saturday afternoon, MLive.com/Wolverines. Stick with us for complete coverage. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you guys soon.